Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random.
Exceptional Radio.
Hey, good afternoon. It is the 3rd of July. It's almost Grand Fireworks Display Day, where we can expect a barrage of explosions and bright lights and the sky going crazy and driving our pets insane. Just going to throw that out there. People with dogs and cats and gerbils and ferrets, they, probably have to have some little concern about coming home to a pile or a puddle of things. Unless their dogs are cool with explosions, and some dogs are cool with explosions, but I don't know many cats that are. And, yeah, so I'm pretty sure that this is the time of year that those, the Thunder shirts or they're swaddling.
Thunder vests.
Yeah, Thunder vests, that's it. The swaddling clothing for dogs and cats, sales go through the roof during this week. Everyone's just, or probably the month preceding, because everyone who tried to get one last year didn't get one in time, and then they can't find the one they ordered last year because, you only need it during fireworks season.
First time I heard the name Thunder Jacket or Thunder Vest or whatever, I was like, oh, that's so cool. That's the coolest sounding thing. And then I learned what it was for, and I was like, oh, that's terrible.
Yeah. They give a swaddling jacket the most badass name possible. That's pretty brilliant. It's pretty smart.
Yeah, Thunder Jacket sounds way cooler than what it is for.
Yeah.
And then the animal that needed the Thunder Vest, I'm like, oh, well, that's kind of weak. You're supposed to be protecting the house, and you got cowering underneath the couch and shit with your Thunder Vest.
Oh man, it sucks because Bruce goes wandering from room to room, barking at the windows. He's like, it's rough because I can't be like, what's wrong? Did little Timmy fall down a well all night long? Because it's only fun the first time, and then afterwards it's just kind of like, oh man, he's. Some cats.
Yeah, the whole.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was gonna say the whole fireworks thing. It seems so disconnected from the realities of war and what it's meaning to represent and what we're so far. Ostensibly, the empire, the nation that we are celebrating was one of the worst groups of people ever. So I'm like, I get the notion of wanting to have a tradition and celebrate history, but this specific, it's as if two shitty people were arguing and then we're celebrating the shitty people that we happen to be part of. And it's like, oh, we're fucking awesome. Let's celebrate our independence from these other shitty people because we were still not we, but this country was still gonna oppress some people in the process because that's just what we do.
Man.
And there's no point that if you could celebrating America is always going to be celebrating someone's oppression, and that's because we're descendant from British oppression as our model. Our nation's parent was one of the history's worst offenders concerning oppression. So as Britain's national offspring, America is British light.
What's crazy about that is America took the model and perfected it And then the English were like, oh, let's take the plantation model to India because this thing's working in the Americas. Assholes.
Yeah. So there's a whole lot of like, what's going on? What are we doing here? What's this seller? Like, are we really gonna spend a shitload of money on blowing up gunpowder in colors to celebrate white supremacist institutions? Still, are we still doing that in 2022?
I'm pretty sure that the commerce that is expected surrounding fireworks day is most of that revenue is enjoyed by the Chinese.
Oh yeah, for sure. Most definitely. That's the big secret, is the Chinese are the biggest progenitors of like fucking July 4th. they want July 4th to keep going.
Oh yeah. Well, they make the best damn fireworks.
Oh man. Well, it's funny though, because like I know there's a ton of Chinese people in my neighborhood and they just do fireworks year round. So it's like, just do that. Just if you want to just go set off some fireworks, just go buy some fucking fireworks and do them. But this idea of like, everybody, let's set off all these fireworks at once because we can't do anything balanced. It has to be all or nothing. And it's just like one day a year, we want to jam all the fucking fireworks into one fucking day. Is where the thing about it is when there's just fireworks going off randomly all year, when like one person's doing them, at first you're like, oh, what the fuck is that? It didn't kind of sound like a car backfiring. It didn't really sound like a gunshot. I'm like, oh, somebody's setting off fireworks. And then you move on with your day. But like on the 4th of July, it's like, okay, I guess I'm like not gonna do anything for the next 2 hours.
And then you go outside 2 hours later and everything smells like sulfur, and then you don't want to be outside, and then the explosions start up again, but it's still light out, so you can't actually see anything. But then it gets dark enough, and then it still smells bad, and then the sky's flashing. And even when you close the shades, it's still flashing at you like a strobe light, like off in the distance. And so even when you try, and I don't even live in town, so I'm only recalling my memories from living in town, but like, man, it's just...
one of the worst parts about it is living in town. Sometimes you can hear it but not see it. So then it's like you're getting all of the worst aspects of it and none of the good parts.
Yeah.
And it's just like your home is shaking and reverberating from what sound, it does sound like cannon fire and shit. And it's like, well, this is fucking dumb. And
it has the sirens, it has the flashing lights, it has the rumble. The only thing it's missing is synthesizers and bass and like a good beat. And then it might be like tolerable, but it's also so out of time and just
arrhythmic.
Yeah.
And then the grand finale is
the grand finale sounds like when you stick your head right up next to a microwave while you're popping popcorn.
I think America and like white Western culture has abused music and sound in a way that results in these types of things where it's like, in the same way that this culture has abused food and abused people's palates and made them only really able to taste like massive amounts of sodium or massive amounts of sugar. It's like these people are only have anything evoked emotion wise if it's like all of the fireworks. Make it like I have to see 45 minutes worth of fireworks all at once, and they can't just do little, neighborhood fireworks displays. It has to be fucking mortars. It has to be like 200 mortar shells, and it's got to be a dangerous event where the person setting it up might fucking die if all of the shells go off at once, because that's actually happened before. And it's like,
Oh man, I knew a
It's
guy
so
who
fucking dumb.
who they strapped a mortar to like a construction helmet or a bicycle helmet or maybe a skateboard helmet, and they lit the mortar, and he ended up in the hospital with a traumatic brain injury, like life altering brain trauma type shit.
Jesus.
And it's you'd think that common sense would kick in, like don't detonate a concussive device. It's called a mortar, and that's the worst part is that there's a culture that actively compared these explosive devices to legitimate like dynamite or TNT, like the gold standard for explosives and shit. Like when these things are, even if it's just like, oh, it's an eighth stick, a quarter stick, a 16th of a stick of dynamite, it should never even be compared to dynamite in the first place. And then like, under normal circumstances, you or I could go to like a Tractor Supply store and buy tannerite, uh, with the goal of obviously to destroy a tree stump. But neither of us have a license to use that, and so technically we can buy it and we can transport it, but we can't actually use that without a license. And so people are buying fucking things called mortars, and if it has the word missile or rocket in it, I don't think that normal people should be buying it. But Saturn V rocket is a thing that you can buy, and it shoots a bunch of little missiles into the air and they explode. And that's fine, but I'm sure that some kids lost an eye at some point or some adult. And I know someone's house is definitely caught on fire because of fireworks and Roman candles. And I'm not saying that I'm like, a saint. I remember being a young, stupid person and engaging in Roman candle wars where we would put on like swim goggles and chased each other through fields or big parks and just, I don't think anyone got hurt. Definitely got singed a few times. It was definitely one of the dumber things that I've done.
Just, the things that it's meant to represent in this specific culture, the way that they've bastardized fireworks, it's just, man, I know it's like once you know too much about them, it just ruins it, and all you see is like imperialism trying to water itself down and make itself tolerable, which is where having imperialism constantly put reminders in people's faces to be patriotic or adhere to this specific standard. It's like knowing that other countries have women basically rioting in the streets for the same shit that just happened here, while people here are just like tweeting and like lamenting about it and just basically not doing anything. It's to me, the evidence, not necessarily evidence, I'm not really trying to prove, it's more so that imperialism has a means of manufacturing consent, and people, if they're not aware of it, they just go along with it. And I think the biggest problem with the Democrats is that the people who are like the constituents have been extending empathy towards the other side, in the sense of giving them the benefit of the doubt that they're working in good faith and operating in good faith. But it's like, with the manufactured consent in place, when the government is not working in our, it's not even about working in our favor. So, because it's like you have half the population who wants one thing and half the population who wants another thing. If the government was balanced and worked in their favors as their parties were meant to do, then they would have protection among the law or within the law among their parties with their representation. But people on the left don't have the same type of protection of their ideologies that the people on the right do, and that's why they're starting to be stripped away. Meanwhile, right-wing ideologies are being more entrenched in our legal system, while we're technically in a democratic executive branch and democratic it's technically a democratic legislative branch, but we have people who are Democrat in name only that basically are it's people like that, Cinema and Manchin, that make the like center line keep drifting right. It's those types of people that now we're here because the notion of like, oh, I'm blue, I'm a Democrat, I'm on this team, and then these people just have like these ridiculous right-wing platforms, like Andrew Yang, for example. That dude was right-wing like a motherfucker and was claiming to be Democrat, and when finally pushed, he ended up becoming libertarian and was clearly right of center. So when you have these people who are like pretending to be Democratic but are clearly right of center, and then a Democratic constituency that is not understanding enough of how manufactured consent works. They don't understand gerrymandering because they didn't have to learn how it works, because a lot of them weren't oppressed minorities then. I mean, in the sense of like, women were always an oppressed minority, but white women didn't think that they had the same type of in gaining many advances in society. I think white women had separated themselves out from other minorities, if they ever thought of themselves as an oppressed minority in the same way. Like, I understand women know that they don't get paid equally, and they know that they're not equal in society, but there's this element of white women seemingly not thinking that they are in the same boat as the other minorities because they're white, as if their whiteness gives them an advantage. And now that veneer of security has been stripped away for the Democratic white women, and I think that's why we're starting to see people like lose their minds, because like they had this thin veneer of safety in their minds, and that's gone. And like, black people never had that shit in our minds. Like, black women especially never had that shit in their minds, or like gay black people or like trans black people. We never had that shit in our minds. So it's not something that was able to be stripped away, because once it gets stripped away, there's like this it's like a culture shock of realizing you're not you're less of a citizen than you thought you were. And I'm sure that there's some sort of like identity crisis that goes along with it. You know, in 2008, you had
Isn't
people
that like at the heart of being woke, though?
Oh my God!
Because
that word,
I'm serious.
The word is meaningless now.
I know, like, but my understanding is that word came about because black women were entering entrepreneurship and becoming business owners and developers of real revenue streams, and they were all running into this, like, you know, essentially they were hitting a ceiling, and they were realizing the limits that society had placed upon them, and they were awakened at that point. They were woke, and they knew then what they had to do. And then this term becomes usurped by suburban culture, who want to have small e-commerce businesses on Amazon and be influencers.
Well, I mean, that's like a very.
I realize that's like the nickel tour.
That's like 40, 50, I mean, really like 70 years condensed. So it's like, when we're talking about a black renaissance and like an awakening, that's something that was then co-opted by white people when you're like, oh, woke baby. So white people taking the word and then stripping it of its dignity associated with Black Renaissance is when the word started to become meaningless, and now it's like a pejorative term for anything associated with like Black empowerment that's used by the right and still used by the left as if it's meant to, like, woke has replaced social justice, and people on the center left still use it as if Black people still use it. Like, Black people stopped using it once white people stopped using it the way they did, but now it's not something that is associated with the Black Renaissance among Black people in that like terminology. And it's like the bastard, because here's the problem: the white supremacist culture takes words and bastardizes them and upends their meaning, and it does this with like trends, it does this with clothing, and it's meant to do this in order to take the power away from that thing. So when like there's like a Black Renaissance happening, you see the music start to be pushed towards destruction and move away from enlightenment and things like that. So that's exactly like, it's not about Black women specifically. It's about like, there was a Black Renaissance happening. And the empowerment of women is part of that. But at the same time, when white culture perpetually depends upon identifying elements of empowerment and then infantilizing them, that's when like that's why woke baby in its like the notion that a baby scribbling on a board being at a protest is woke is the literal infantilization of the Black Renaissance movement. And white people were just doing it like, oh, this is so cute. Like, you're minimalizing Black Renaissance and you don't even realize it. So that's where people like Bill Maher, he was never an ally. He was always just there for the money and pretending. So you see, like, he has a history of like demeaning Black women, even though he has a history of dating Black women. It was like he was using that as a means of giving himself a shield to then do this one image in public, while he then is like a horrible, shitty human being behind closed doors, specifically to Black women, because he knew he could. And he's like making it like, oh, society doesn't care about you, so I can pretend to be like this one person in public and then treat you like shit behind closed doors. So this is where like Black women specifically were in this like invisible group that white women weren't in, which is where that separation, like white feminism is ultimately like harmful to Black women the way that it was implemented, and for many reasons. So this is where it's not like feminism is not inherently racial, but the way that like centrist democratic women in America like went about that feminist approach, it didn't even look at Black women as humans in the same way. So Black women were like largely left out of the feminist movement in the like early stages. And that's kind of where what we have now is a separation of white women as their own minority class. And it's like, this gets back to the right wing starting to use identity and individualism as a weapon against the left wing, because at a certain point, hyper individualism makes it impossible for a unit to form. So it's like, if white women went along for so long thinking that they were a special oppressed class that was above the other oppressed classes, but still they knew that they were oppressed, it makes it near impossible for them to reintegrate into a movement with the other oppressed classes because they have their identity carved out, identified by whiteness, and they don't want to lose the perceived benefits they thought they had above the other classes because they knew that they were like oppressed because they were women, but they thought that their whiteness gave them, oh, I'll get a mortgage where these other people can't, or oh, I'll get health care where the black women won't, or you know, if I go to as like a single white mother to do something, I'm not going to get looked at the same way as a single black mother. And there's all these things as like what white women thought that they were protected from, that now they're definitely not protected from that shit. And I'm not sure if like it's still happening, so I'm not sure how people are going to handle it. And it's like Americans aren't really good at handling change, but they're also not good at handling stress either. So I'm just like I said, watching other women in other countries like
I wonder
riot.
what the results would be if we polled 100 random people to define homeostasis.
Oh my God. Jesus Christ. How many of them would like
It has nothing to do with homies.
think that they were or that you were hitting on them as a gay man or something? Like we don't do that around here. You don't want none of that homeostasis. Oh my God. So I haven't, like, this is definitely still like, okay. America is the weirdest, like, it can't be real because you have simultaneously people having their rights stripped away, and then on the other hand, everybody's like concerned about whether Stranger Things is queer baiting or not. And it's like you can't these concerns are not concerns of real people, in the sense of like the way that the discussions among our people are manufactured and pushed upon us, as if like if my rights are really being stripped away in the way that Democrats are trying to say they are, so they can fundraise more money to then enable the right-wing Republicans to strip more fucking rights while they then do nothing in return, so they can say they'll do something if I give them more fucking money and vote harder. If like this bullshit cycle isn't actually, it doesn't feel in the sense of like, it might as well be a WWE fucking government, right? Like it's scripted in the sense, like, I don't know who's writing the script. I don't know if there's an actual script. I'm not saying someone's like fucking telling Alexandria Octavio Cortez to go out and like say this one thing and then have the right wing fucking mouth breather come out and say something stupid in response. I'm not saying that it's that granular in concerns of the writing. In terms of how I feel in like as far as my vote affecting the outcome of what the government does, it might as well be fucking WWE, and I'm watching them do some shit that they know that they're gonna do, and they're pretending like they don't know the outcome, but they already know the fucking outcome. Especially when the fucking Supreme Court memo was leaked weeks before they did that shit, and then they got the fucking guards posted up outside their houses in case somebody went and did something, which nobody's gonna fucking do because this is America, and people are too busy with fucking Stranger Things. So that's where I'm like, it can't be real. Like, I mean,
So
obviously we're real, but there.
in the last week,
like the vote can't matter.
No, in the last week, there has been an increase in the number of men seeking vasectomies nationwide. And so 2 days ago, The Onion reported men rushing to get vasectomies after Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade. And they are being very conservative when they say some clinics are seeing 300 to 400% spike in people looking to receive consultations. And it turns out that there is a clinic in Missouri that saw a 900% increase in vasectomy consultations and scheduling. And so I think this is like genuinely, this is nice. And there's some guys out there they think this is a good solution, and bless their hearts. They may have, reduced the population of people who would support pro-choice legislation. Way to go, team. Oh boy.
I think people are not vocal enough about their choice not to breed.
I don't think
call it breeding in
Yeah.
the sense of like, we need to have a vocal I'm not breeding movement because I'm not giving this machine a fucking another piece of meat to grind up. And that's part of it.
I'm
like,
all about
they're trying
that.
to pretend that it's about like rights and all. No, this is like the machine needs meat to grind, and they got to get their fucking meat one way or another, whether it's looking like, oh, the Supreme Court's taking our rights. No, they need to make sure they got babies for the fucking grinder. And that's as simple as it is. So I don't think people are.
I think if people are honest with why they want a vasectomy, that's perfect. But
but
someone's like, I'm getting a vasectomy because they overturned Roe versus Wade. Well, that's like a really. I don't think that's a completely thought out reason. That's like a rushed. That's a rushed decision. There are plenty of reasons,
and this is where
there are plenty of reasons to not breed and to not participate in the breeding population. There are plenty of reasons, but because the Supreme Court decided to say some dumb shit, that should be less of a reason than many of the other reasons to not be a part of the breeding population.
Well, and it's like it's not. It only sounds extreme because nobody's doing anything, and that's where in Poland. The women are like, we're not going to do anything, and we'll start burning shit down. So, like, the idea that, like, people saying, oh, I'm not going to have a baby, that shit, it fucking feels extreme in America because this is actually, like, the Quaker state, and we've moved so far right that this is, like, a fucking Quaker state, like a nation, a Quaker nation, and we don't even, some of us in the little pockets of awareness understand it, but I really do honestly believe that a lot of people on the left who were like watching Handmaid's Tale in 2016, 2017, whenever it came out, like if you needed white women suffering through those things to understand what had already happened in America, you never thought of these other people as real humans. And that's what I'm getting at is like, people are like, oh, it's a Handmaid's Tale. You mean the shit that's been happening to like Native and Black women all forever? The shit that you needed to be fictionalized to happen to white women, that's now about to start happening to white women. Like those people, if they were on the left, then we were always a Quaker nation. And people like us, like I'm really starting to think that the hippie movement is the beginning of the end for social progress, and the hippie movement was like started by the CIA. I know that like suspicion has always been out there, but more and more to me the hippies start to look like when everything started to go wrong, because you have all these people who are like, oh man, just fucking get high and fucking just dance things away, man. Just do some music, man. And like the way that the hippies threw a gigantic wrench in social, like the social discourse in the way that the left was meant to retaliate to the right wing, because it's almost as if everybody on the left is supposed to act like hippies now because of the way that the right wing has changed the discourse and made it, they have changed the narrative so that these hippies that were a very small portion, like, oh man, put the flower in the gun and this shit, like as if that was the way the
I'm pretty
entire
sure that chick
left
got
wing
arrested after the picture.
and that's where again it's like as if that was meant to represent everything on the left and not the Black Panthers and not Malcolm X and not Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., because the shit that Black leftists were saying was actually left in a lot of cases and actually like socialist. And then you get like right-wing people quoting Dr. Martin Luther King about like they always go, I just want to have it's literally the same fucking line. And it's as if they're trying to do that shit again with Dr. Martin Luther King. I fucking see it happening. They're trying to, like, in the same way that motherfuckers are making money off of Che Guevara selling T-shirts, they're trying to take Dr. Martin Luther King and turn him against Black people. That shit is not about to happen, though. And this is where the way that they do that shit is like, they can do it so long as the white left complies. And you see it with Juneteenth. And like the white left was like going along with it. Oh yeah, we'll take Juneteenth off and like, yeah, we'll buy some Juneteenth ice cream. And then Black people like, hold the fuck up. What are you doing? No, you don't buy and sell Juneteenth ice cream, you pieces of shit. And then it's like, it was the reaction to capitalism trying to like sink its teeth into Juneteenth, and like the white left not knowing like how to respond and like just letting it happen. Because the problem is they did that shit with like Pride too, and I think that because there's no like racial restriction on who can be gay, it's really hard for any group to be like, don't make Pride ice cream. Like, unless the LGBT like association or something comes out and is like, hey, we really don't want this, but they've got really bigger things to worry about. Whereas like Black Twitter can fucking flame Walmart for trying to sell some Juneteenth ice cream and make it trend and make it a big thing in like 24 hours in a way that like I'm not really sure that, I don't know if there's a gay Twitter. Like there may be. I guess like I guess I just would never be part of it in that like the way that Black Twitter works is such a phenomenon that like other people who are not,
so
like,
it's believed that ice cream originated in the Mongol Empire and spread throughout China during its expansion.
Once again, they invent everything, man. Fucking
Sandwiches and ice cream.
And what is life but sandwiches and ice cream? That's
root beer floats. That's ice cream.
Well, it's funny. There's only a few forms for food to take, and everything else is just spice.
Yeah.
Like the delivery methods.
Do you eat it with your hands or a utensil? Or do you just put your face in it? I suppose modern science has delivered foods that can be consumed through a straw or a pill. Although I'm pretty sure the Jetsons food pill is not what it was cracked up to be. Because I know that you can get like a 2,000 calorie. It looks like a pill and it's gigantic, like a horse pill, but you definitely don't want to just swallow it. You have to chew on them slowly. But
so much of our food information is couched in industry propaganda, where I'm like, as an adult, I'm always constantly learning, but I'm having to unlearn so much stuff about the way things were framed. So, like, for example, with proteins, it's like the way that we eat, or we're taught to eat meat to get protein, as if that's like the most protein rich, but then it's like, well, what do those animals eat? And generally the ones that we eat are vegetarians, which is like, okay, how does that fucking work then? And the issue is our bodies are doing a lot of the chemical decomposition and restructuring to make these things like attainable or usable for our cells. So something taken in one form can be broken down and absorbed in another form only if the proper chemical compounds are present to make that reaction happen. And the issue becomes balanced meals lead to a balanced nutrition absorption like breakdown. And when you have like,
this is a really interesting way to describe homeostasis too.
Yeah, getting back to homeostasis, full circle. But like, if you have a super like protein heavy or carb heavy or fiber heavy diet, it becomes difficult for your body to reach homeostasis, because then it's having to compensate by breaking down other things at much higher rates. So if you don't take in the other nutrients like macro and micro in accordance, then you're going to start creating deficiencies other places. So then you get people who like take in too much protein and then they become anemic because their blood can't keep up with the iron production or the iron needs. So like a very common problem you see with people who do too much protein is going anemic. And it's just like, because they're not getting the full picture from like a protein shake company. Like all a protein shake company cares about is you buying their protein. So they're not going to tell you that you need to take all these other vitamins. Some of the companies will tell you, but not all of them will. And it's like, if you don't take all these other vitamins in tandem with the increased protein, you're going to fucking probably get kidney stones and you're probably going to go anemic. And it's like, you have to, because the companies are putting out all this, just because I don't want to call it misinformation. It's like half the story to make their product seem useful without telling the other side to give it the full context. Then like a kid, or like a, not necessarily a kid, but somebody who's in their early 20s who doesn't have the time to learn all of the elements to it, then ends up starting to take protein shake, or they start doing creatine, or they start adding these like supplements to their diet that end up throwing off their body's capacity to naturally balance what it's taking in. And then they need the supplements even more, and it creates this weird dependency chain. And it's only after like going through all of the different supplement, like every single one, but all of the different types of supplements and understanding how they're affecting my body. And then like, it really like, if you just eat a balanced diet, it's better than taking all the supplements like for the sake of keeping homeostasis. Because the issue is like, once you start adding things and start like changing the balance, if you get used to those things, then you can't like take one thing out without completely throwing off the balance. So that's where it's like, on the one hand, you can do supplements and do that shit for short term, but actually for like long term benefits, it's probably not really good to start doing supplements. And I'm saying this after a long history of like working out and you know, training and all these things. And I only say that because I've been watching a lot of documentaries about like post career bodybuilders. And a lot of them, like you see them in their prime in the media, but you don't see what's happening to them after all that shit's done. And a
Man boobs.
I mean, not even, dude, they're lucky if that's it. Like, some of them are dying at like 40, 45, because their hearts just can't fucking take it. Their hearts and their livers, and their internal organs can't keep up with all that muscle. Your bodies are not meant to have fucking 300 pounds of muscle. Like, nobody.
Yeah. Well,
nobody.
When your body runs out of actual fat stores to supply energy to muscle, it starts going after organs that also contain fat, and like the number 1 and 2 organs that contain the most fat are like the brain and then the liver. So you lose your cognitive abilities, and then you lose your body loses its ability to process toxins and nasty shit out of the blood. That's horrible.
Yeah, there is a such thing as too much muscle, and it took a long time. I think there's like a name for it now. They call it bigorexia.
Bigorexia.
Yeah, no, it's like a real thing, man.
Oh man,
there's a whole documentary about it.
That sounds like a cartoon ailment.
It's like, yeah, it sounds. The name sounds dumb, like, but when you see it and you hear what people who have bigorexia, like the symptoms of it, then it's like, oh my God, this is like a real problem, especially with the people who are willing to like do steroids and abuse substances to get bigger and just perpetually get bigger. And that's where I'm like, I think there's a cultural exchange that happens between like what people are shown versus what they want to attain. And when you see all of the like bodybuilding athletes going on this trajectory where Arnold was not the biggest, but he was one of the biggest at a certain point where you're like, okay, if this dude can just like start getting into movies because he's just super big, and people think that's what it is. Like, Arnold was taking acting classes, and he's not a stupid person, clearly.
No.
So there's a lot of things about him that made him able to transition from bodybuilding into acting, and obviously eventually politics. But the people that see that then are like, oh, if I just become a big enough bodybuilder, then I can eventually start making that money the same way he did. Not to say that he's the only one, but he's the easiest to go to concerning references.
Oh, Lou Ferrigno's pretty easy to go to.
Yeah, and I don't know if people like, especially between the two. And then this is one of those interesting things is like, I guess the pumping iron narrative was like completely fabricated between the two. So that's some shit that was like an industry secret for decades, where like Lou Ferrigno's dad was not his trainer, and um, the way that they did the story, Lou Ferrigno had he ended up in a small gym with his dad training him, which was not how he was normally training. So by them shooting that documentary, they almost definitely like affected the outcome of that contest so that Lou wouldn't have had the same capacity to win because he wasn't doing his normal shit. And so that's like an interesting side note where there's all these things about even down to that Pumping Iron movie basically being the catapult for Arnold to get into like the public eye, with Lou Ferrigno being his whipping boy in the process as part of the narrative, is also kind of where like Lou has always played second fiddle to Arnold. And that's kind of where it starts. And this is, this gets back to what I mean in the sense of when people are fed these narratives in the form of a movie or in the form of a news story, it starts this point where it's like near impossible for that narrative ever to change, even if the actual story eventually gets out. Like Lou Ferrigno will have forever been stuck in Arnold's shadow because of Pumping Iron. And that can never be undone. And that's the power of media to affect people's perceptions, but also ultimately the source of shit like bigorexia. Or, I mean, I'm assuming anorexia has a lot of the same, like, there's probably a lot of other shit that influences anorexia, but, body dysmorphia ultimately has a lot to do with what we're shown in the media and how we're trying to compare ourselves to that shit.
Oh man, you just reminded me of those like clickbait things that are like what Hollywood stars would look like if they lived in the Midwest. And they do a deep fake where they put Jay-Z and Beyonce's face on some couple, and then they do like a Brad Pitt in the Midwest or Matt Damon, and they're all a little tubby and a little packing a little extra. And it's the kind of thing that it reminds me of the kind when I watch the interviews, and this hasn't been for a while, so maybe the culture has changed, but I doubt it. They talk about these intense diets or workout regimens or nutritionists, and just to meet the goal of looking right for the part. I'm talking about like tens of thousands of dollars for like a few months to get somebody in shape for a movie. That can't be right. That can't be healthy. Like going from super fit to not fit to really not fit to emaciated to super fit to, all that kind of rapid and dramatic changes to the physique. That can't be good. And by rapid, I mean like over the course of a year. I mean, it's probably good to lose weight, but all of the dieting research indicates that people can lose weight, but a lot of one of the biggest parts of keeping it off is metabolic, and the host of other behaviors that have to all come together to make those things work. And then we get into behavioral issues that prevent people from sticking the course. So it's not just as simple as like talking to a nutritionist and spending a lot of money at the gym and on special diet foods. And then it's exacerbated, as you pointed out, by the media, where, I mean, I remember when I was in high school, there were these waifish-looking models that looked like they would get blown over by a strong gust of wind, and they were all over magazines and selling stuff on television. I'm sure that stuff still exists. I just don't watch enough television to know.
Well, I think they are getting better about not having the same body types. Um,
A lot of that
but then
stuff
it
seems like
becomes
it's
like,
grotesque in proportion.
well, and what you're alluding to is like they then use the body type as like a crutch. So if somebody's not uh, like a size 0, then they're comic relief, or like their weight is like a point of the story, and it's like it's like this fake representation in that um, in their world, big people don't exist, and not saying like if you go to certain places, like yeah, people are smaller. Like in LA, people are generally smaller than Indiana. As soon as you get off the plane, you notice the difference in the general population size. Like when you leave the Midwest, so it's not even untrue that other places people are smaller than they are here. Um, but then when you're like, I guess okay, for example, like Stranger Things and Hawkins, even in the '80s, you're still gonna have some chunks. You're gonna have some chunky boys, and it wasn't enough chunks. Like the '80s, especially when you got like double cheeseburgers at McDonald's and shit, still like super cheap. Um, and obviously, kids are playing outside. Uh, but I was definitely like, I remember I was there in the '80s. It was really easy to get really like husky. Husky was the term.
Man,
Like food was so available that it was easy to go husky, where you're like wearing man-sized pants but short.
man, you could like get a ice cream sandwich on like any corner practically.
Oh yeah, ice
And
cream man driving
the
around.
ice cream trucks, yeah, they had like 3 of them on rotation around Bryant Park, I think. Oh man, could go to the ice cream parlor and get your fill of ice cream whenever you wanted. I guess that still exists.
Well, now they're tacos. Like
Interesting. So,
the taco trucks.
huh? Interesting. So they've cheaped out on the cone, so now it definitely slides out the back end of it.
Well, I mean, like in the sense of like you don't have ice cream trucks now. We have taco and gyro trucks.
Yeah, that's true.
Like I feel like they grew up with us. And it's like I still go get ice cream if the truck rolled around, but I'd much prefer whenever
I don't know, man. I don't
the
think I have enough
trucks
energy
roll
to
up.
chase down an ice cream truck like I used to. I mean, I was willing to like run or ride a bike really hard to catch those things, but anymore, like I don't think so. Taco trucks and Euro trucks don't try to get away from you.
No, they totally like they just wait. Oh man.
Maybe the ice cream truck needs to come back as like a gourmet, like a gelato truck or something, or a nitrogen ice cream truck.
But it like never stops moving. You have to chase it down and or place your order while it's going. So
They give it to
it
you
promotes healthy living.
yeah, they deliver it to you through a chute while it's in transit. Yeah, there's got to be a way to get the ice cream truck back in full effect. If Delta 8 and other, what is it, hemp-based products can be sold in the mall, then the ice cream truck surely can exist in Heatwave America. Also, I expect the snow cone to come back, but I don't really see that happening either.
Yeah, I guess I haven't seen a snow cone place for a while. I never really understood snow cones because I was like, so wait, it's just like ice and syrup?
Yeah, it's like
And they're like, yeah,
you
it's just ice
basically
and syrup.
you're just waiting for it to turn into Kool-Aid.
Yeah, it's like like a flat soda. Unmixed Kool-Aid, yeah.
Yeah, it's just Kool-Aid that hasn't turned back into Kool-Aid. It's for transportation purposes. No,
I think that's clearly one of those times where the texture was problem. I'm a very texture-oriented eater, but the texture is a problem with that.
yeah, the
for
syrup's
me.
too thick, and the ice nodules are actually too big for what they are, and you can't make it out of that like condensed ice stuff like they sell it at baseball games or athletic events. That stuff's like the best ice, but it just disappears almost instantly. If your fluid that you're trying to keep cold isn't already cold, it just melts. The one ice trend that I have grown quite fond of is the ice ball, where you fill up a silicone orb sphere thing. It's halved, and freeze it. And when you're done, you have this orb of ice. And if you're lucky, it doesn't have any big fissures in it. And then you have an ice ball that lasts for hours. Unfortunately, most of the ice balls that I make have some giant fissure in them, and they, kind of explode when I add them to water or soda or juice. And it's not just like a normal ice cube that cracks and pops. It's like pop, and makes a pretty loud noise and gets some soda. I'm usually adding it to soda, but I wonder if the soda has anything to do with it.
I don't know what it is about soda being like the perfect drink to go with a meal, but I wonder if it's like well, I think they used to like call them digestive sodas, right? Because
They were tonics. They were
Yeah.
digestive aids, and they were made by doctors a lot. I think that's one of the origins of Dr. Pepper.
That's funny.
Coca-Cola.
I mean, it does seem to like help digestion.
Well, yeah, it's a highly acidic beverage. Most of those things will dissolve meat, like raw meat, if left in a container. It's pretty weird. Not a lot. I mean, I'm not saying you can just like put a ribeye in a pan and dissolve it with a can of Coke. That's not going to happen. But it definitely can degrease. But speaking of THC, apparently in Minnesota, the state legislature unanimously legalized THC edibles that are derived from hemp farming.
They did it on accident.
Well, some people did it on accident. Some people were very deliberate in it, but it accidentally went through unanimously. So for the time being, until they figure out how to do, oh no, this is the best part. Any place can sell them. If any business, if they operate as a business and pay taxes, and no, they can sell the edibles in Minnesota, and they don't have to pay taxes on the edibles.
Wow.
Passed unanimously. They're just giving away free money. So it's almost like the burden of accounting for all of the THC products that will be sold is too much of a hindrance to them. So fuck it, they're just not going to bother about collecting tax on it. I probably misread the article, but I'm pretty sure it said they weren't going to tax the THC products. If only Indiana could get on board with something like that, you know?
Yeah.
Except maybe they could just tax it and make some extra money. I still think the Pothole Act made a lot of sense in diverting a portion of marijuana revenues towards infrastructure maintenance, like fixing the roads. I thought that was a great idea. Never went anywhere. And then I think this year it was on the docket. They were gonna explore marijuana legalization in Indiana, but then they stopped because the federal government is moving towards some kind of resolution. I think it was originally called the MORE Act, but then that failed, and the Senate wants to push some COP or CPO or CAP, CPA Act, their version of it, which is mostly just about making money. It's crazy. Like, we've got a significant portion of the population supports reforming marijuana laws, but they won't do it. And then a significant portion of the population didn't want what happened with Roe v. Wade to happen, but then it happened. And then a small portion of the population, probably the same ones that wanted Roe Wade overturned, they got constitutional carry in a bunch of states. The Onion is completely accurate in its reporting for the last several weeks.
I wonder if they're just going to shut down at some point. Like, you guys broke us.
Yeah.
We have nothing left to satirize.
I mean, when we're past the point of this stuff just keeps writing itself to the point of, is it really even satire anymore if it's real?
Right. Well, yeah, it's like, if you look at The Onion, it just looks like a normal news plus site right now.
That's so fucked up. I'm serious. It's so fucked up.
It just looks, I mean, aside from like the Elmo, there's like only a couple stories that make you realize like, oh, this is actually The Onion. Like, biggest lies Americans are taught about the 4th of July. Well, that could be true. We already had a discussion about how China is basically fucking benefiting the most from our love for imperialist metaphors.
And they invented ice cream. Fuck.
Next we're gonna learn they invented apple pie too, right?
I mean, they probably did. I'm serious. There's probably. I think I read something years ago.
That's why it's funny.
I know. It's like, I think years ago I read something talking about the three things that Eastern culture did not invent on their own. It's like the helix, and the double helix, and the impeller, which is another form of helix. Basically, they didn't invent the helix, and two of its subvariants. Everything else is on parity with Western culture.
Well, it wasn't America anyway, but it was the English, the Dutch, and the Swedes. It's not American as apple pie. Apples are native to Asia.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure there's a Chinese apple pie out there that we've never had, that we've just been denied our entire lives because the Chinese were smart and be like, no, these motherfuckers can't have our damn apple pies. They can have anything else.
Right.
We're not letting them have the apple pies.
Yeah. Oh yeah, they definitely got one that they're keeping hidden from us. With their sandwiches, those glorious Chinese
Oh man,
sandwiches.
straight up ancient Chinese secret. Like, who'd have know? Who'd have thunk it's an apple pie? Like, maybe if the English hadn't been such bastards, we'd have Chinese apple pie right now. In addition to all the other apple pies that we get to enjoy.
A dumpling deep fried with apples and I don't know what else on top, but I'm sure it would be delicious.
I mean, yeah. That sounds like it exists. That sounds like it should exist. That sounds like the kind of thing some person in China with a street walk and like a bucket of oil could make up in like no time at all. They have like 5 ingredients: a bucket of oil, a propane stove, and a wok, and they're just cooking up fried apple. I guess they'd be like fritters, but yeah.
Well, I know I've had a sweet version of Rangoon that was like it had like cream cheese and like cinnamon and
cool.
sugar in it. It was delicious. I don't remember where I fucking had it, but it was definitely like a sweet version of Rangoon that I'm like, if that exists, I'm sure like they probably have different fillings with, you know.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I remember walking by a Chinese pastry shop many times when I was younger, or maybe it was just the pastry section of a store, of a grocery store. But I just remember always seeing like this variety of pastries that were, well, I guess they weren't really foreign to me because I would see them, but they didn't look like anything normal that I could see it like. They didn't look like donuts. I'd be really surprised if there's a culture out there that just doesn't have anything sweet in the cookbook somewhere. Surely there's I guess there's probably there very well could be a culture out there that doesn't have any sweet foods. I guess now that I think about it.
Well, the sweet bread that it looks like the buns in the old like kung fu flicks, but they would have sugar on top of them. That was like one of my favorite. It's like, you know, it's like a whole. I guess it would be like a donut without a hole.
Yeah. Well, no, I've had Chinese donuts before. They're delicious. They're very different. They have a different like dough consistency, but Chinese donuts are a thing. Fried balls of the sugary yeasty stuff. Fuck yeah. Man, I also want to throw some shade at Americans in the late 1800s for passing the Alien Act and fucking ruining the West Coast. We might have all the Chinese desserts and ice cream and shit that we don't have. We probably would have their sandwiches too. And we'd have all the Asian fusion that should have emerged but never emerged. It would have been like Cajun food, but on the West Coast and primarily like Asian instead of French. And Spanish. And Italian. And Portuguese. Oh man, you know, we've been denied so much cool stuff because of politics in America. Maybe that's what America should be remembered for, is making shit just complicated.
Well, I'm like, it seems like it's falling apart and it doesn't know where to fall apart.
Yeah.
It doesn't know which seam to tear first or which seam is coming apart first.
Well,
is how it feels and reads in real time.
I mean, the golden darling of the automotive industry is losing 20% of its output right now because China's not producing Teslas.
Oh my God, that's amazing. That shit is hilarious to me.
That's so rough.
Meanwhile, my parents are like thinking about getting an electric car, which is hilarious. Like they're starting to look at people my parents' age are finally starting to look at electric vehicles, but basically anything but a Tesla.
Yeah, well, right now the options are like some Hyundai or Kias, and those seem to be pretty nice. And then Tesla, which I I could I'd be so frustrated. I just don't like the Teslas, but Ford has a good product in their truck.
Yeah, the Ford pickup looked pretty nice. It's funny though, because like I don't like the way that the Mustang looks, but if it drives anything like it does on Forza, it's probably fucking amazing. Because like I'm pretty sure that it's like all-wheel drive, which is like an all-wheel drive
Muscle
fucking
car.
Mustang. Yeah.
No, they look like it looks like a Mustang ate a Miata, and they just didn't go to the gym. Just packing that weight in on there. And then it's not quite as. It still looks like a car. The Teslas without, because they're all smooth nosed, they look weird to me. At least the Mustang kind of still pretends to have a grill. The Lightning truck has a grill. The Silverado electric truck has a grill. The Dodge electric Ram has a grill. I can't think of any other electric cars. Oh no, the Hyundais and the Kias, they all have grills. They still look like normal cars because I think those cars share hybrid platforms. It's going to be interesting. I think in maybe 5 to 10 years, when the shape of vehicles changes again, because it does that all the time, and the Tesla vehicles are going to look dated. They're going to look like a car that's still wearing a sheet to protect it from dust while it's being designed. Because it's just...
Well, not to, like, real quick, one of the things that I did notice about, like, I'm sure they got this part accurate. Like, driving a Mustang, the electric sound is just weird. At first, I hated it, but after a while, it was like, okay, this must be what it's like operating a TIE fighter or something. But I don't think people who are not into science fiction would go far enough to make this stretch and be like, okay, this is cool, because it's like this really weird, like, it's like the RC, like,
yeah, they sound like a power drill
noise
spooling up.
Yeah, but
they sound like a dynamo spooling up. That's what electric motors sound like. And the bigger they are, the louder they get, and the whinier they get, and the more pronounced the howl becomes. It's really cool. I'm not gonna lie. I like cars. I like the idea of electric vehicles. I like a lot of the execution thus far. I just don't like one company in particular.
Well, and then I realized, like, to get to that noise, somebody would have to be driving at probably like 120 plus miles an hour. So I don't think they're actually going to get to that, like.
Oh yeah. To wind it up like that, you got to drive them like dangerously fast.
Yeah, so that's where I think you can only probably hear something like that on a track or in a video game. So
yeah,
it's probably, it would be, and that's the problem. The people who end up driving them, I'm not sure if they're going to be disciplined enough to handle all that power to be able to not want to go 120 miles an hour in that thing.
I bet the people who buy the electric truck and who are used to towing things are going to be disciplined enough to not like launch their truck off into the side of the road.
Yeah.
But maybe if they're like, I don't actually, you know what? The fully I was just reading about the Ford truck. The fully loaded can go the longest distance and pull the most. Fully optioned costs somewhere between $85,000 and $95,000 delivered. Depending on dealer fees and whatnot. And so that's a really expensive truck. For that much money, one could buy, an F-250 fully optioned and pull even more. So I don't know. I think there's still, we're just the beginning. We haven't quite seen the price to performance diminishing returns metric kind of resolve itself yet, because there are still options out there that don't require that hefty price to play ball. It'll be interesting though, but still $90,000. I'd like to think that the person who's buying a $90,000 tool to hopefully like work for their business is using it responsibly, and it's not just some trophy.
I mean, I was assuming like some rich kid gets it.
Yeah, that's probably it. Just like the like the Rivians and the Hummers of the world.
I knew multiple rich kids that flipped vehicles that weren't even nearly this powerful. So.
Yeah,
It's like, give a kid a Subaru with a little bit of kick, and they'll find a way to flip it because they're kids.
that's like
that's
the biggest downside of the Cash to Clunkers program, is it robbed generations of young people the ability to find a vehicle to get around in for $500.
Well,
maybe that's good thing.
That's true, but I don't think those vehicles should have been on the road.
They probably shouldn't have been.
Having driven a $500 car, I know for a fact it shouldn't have been on the road. Like at one point, my transmission just like basically fell out while I was driving. Yeah, and it was like, the car was great when it lasted, but I got my $500 worth.
Well, driving. Yeah, I mean it's basically it's like a disposable drink vessel at that point. It's not. I don't think anyone...
It is like a throwaway car.
Yeah, it has to be treated like something that's not going to survive more than a year or two at that price point. Although I think the bottom end of the market for a reasonable vehicle that will last more than a year or two, that should be expected to last like 2 or 3, 4, maybe even 5 years, probably like in the $2,000 to $3,000 range from my last cursory glance at like Craigslist or Facebook Motors. The car market is very, very bad right now. Like, people are asking a lot of money for vehicles that only a few years ago they would have been lucky to get half of that.
Chip shortage is hitting the car market really hard.
Yeah, well, that's just for new cars.
But it's made older cars more expensive because newer cars aren't being... Like, because newer cars are more difficult to attain, older cars are more expensive now.
Well, it's going to get weirder because I think it's like Ukraine is one of the world's leading suppliers of palladium, which is a necessary component for our catalytic converters. And not just that, but they also produce a lot of other rare earth minerals that are necessary for the magnet structures. The permanent magnet structures used in electric vehicle motors. So as long as they're tied up doing that shit, all things electric motors are going to start costing more. Thanks, Putin. Dick. I really believe that, in like 20 years, they're going to consider this last 40 years plus another 20 years to be like a part of the second Cold War or World War III or whatever it is. They're going to have to figure out a way to describe this whole period of war this unending period of war that's gone on like our entire lives. It's like disingenuous to not call it what it is.
It's wild to see. Like, I don't even know. I guess I haven't really had time to check other news sources like outside of the country. But it'd be interesting to see like how other countries are seeing the balance of power globally. Because it totally feels like America is losing its footing globally, but it feels like it's losing its footing locally too. And that's where I'm like,
maybe America, and by extension, all of its interactions with the world have always been this fragile, and we're just now realizing it.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So it's always been this tenuous, but we've existed under the veil of the lens of America, which filters out a lot of things and casts a rosy sheen on everything else. But that can't be right.
It's always been.
Yeah, but that's not 100% true, because like we look at pictures of like Singapore or like Shanghai, and these are extremely well-developed parts of the country that have incredible integration of technology. Or we look at parts of Africa like that have incredible integration of technology, and they look like just incredible cities, giant cities with skyscrapers and lights. They're lit up from space. Like, I think it is. America is just so screwed up.
But I guess part of it is like, I know growing up, the times I did, there was like a clear need for certain things to be changed. And then our generation changed those things. So it's like, while they, we can't be held responsible for all of the things that fell through the cracks. Like, my generation definitely changed a lot of things that were like affecting the entire like nation's population, but were only understood at the ground level by my generation, like our generation, well enough to affect change. And so I think that's where this next generation of youth is going to be that sort of like flow where it's like ebbed, and we're hitting a point where tensions are spilling over and everything is like going to shit, and the left wing has had their will to fight like taken away over time, and this notion of them not, like, the idea that we need to be nice to Nazis because we're on the left somehow planted within our frameworks, and that's how that shit it can't last forever. Like, we've figured it out, we know it's there. We're hitting the bottom point of that shit. Like, as long as there's been some sort of espionage or some sort of subversion in an attempt to move the left towards the right. Now we're way more aware of it, and we know it's there, and we can point to things to show, like, oh yeah, they've actively tried to take our words and infantilize them out of meaning and things like that. So now that we're aware of them, I think it's going to be a lot more difficult to get kids. Like, we're still in a propaganda like censorship hole, but the kids are aware enough and have enough information access with the actual internet that it's not going to be like, it can't be like this forever. It's just, you know, we literally had a fucking civil war about this last time it got that bad. So it's like, if it has to come to a goddamn civil war, eventually it will. But we got a whole fucking planet of non-Americans that, like, eventually somebody's gonna step in and be like, hey, we're gonna save your women from your oppressive regime.
Oh man. So I just watched a Brad Pitt movie called Fury. It's a World War II tank commander, and none of the characters had any. There was no redeeming character qualities of these characters. They were just horrible people, every single one of them. And like they take over a town, and at one point, you know, tank commander's like, if you don't take that woman to that back room, I will. And it's one of those, like, oh man, this guy's despicable. The fuck? Why are we rooting for these guys? Oh yeah, because they're killing Nazis. It's like the only real difference that I could see on screen, because we didn't really see any Nazis. When we see the Nazis, they're doing the same thing that the Americans are doing. They're just killing people.
Yeah.
And other than like wearing a badge that identifies them as Nazis, they don't announce their ideology. But we get plenty of examples of these American troops just letting it be known that they're horrible people. It was a really strange experience watching this. Because I'd only seen some clips on YouTube of the tank battle, and it's like, oh, that's kind of interesting. That's a cool, like, historical reenactment, I guess. Maybe I'll watch this movie. And man, maybe I just don't like World War II movies or something. Maybe
World War II is one of the most over-represented eras in media. It's really strange how much media we have about World War II.
The thing about this was different. I didn't like the characters, though. None of them.
I mean, most of the people in World War II times were shitty humans. So it's like, yeah, the Americans during World War II were shitty as fuck. They're shitty. They're back home having Jim Crow. So,
damn it, Nazis, you can't racism like that.
Right.
Fuck.
You're not racism and right.
Shit.
This is how you racism. In fact, bring your scientists over and we'll build some rockets and send racism into space.
Show you how it's done. Y'all are doing it wrong. Oh, man. Too bad that's not included in the history books.
Yeah. I'm just glad. It's wild. Like, I don't know, on the one hand, if these things were keeping right-wing Americans occupied or not, but like all the doomsday prepper and like ancient alien shit, now that it's gone away, it's like they don't have anything to keep them inside, and they're going out and taking their racism outside. Like, just give them their fucking stupid shit and their conspiracy theory shows and shit, and it's like,
Yeah, but think
we
about
had
the
we had a
ideological
good
war
thing and
between the
didn't
flat
know it.
earthers and the globe earthers would be unending for all time. It would result in cataclysmic wars. The conflict would just be so painful for the rest of us.
Little did we know we had a good thing going when all they were doing was like arguing about whether the Earth was flat or not. It's like, man, it could get so much worse. It could get so much worse.
We had a good thing going, and we just screwed the pooch, guys. Somebody come up with another conspiracy that's plausible enough that it'll occupy their time, but not anything detrimental to the rest of society. NASA, we need you.
Oh, man. Yeah. You know, I haven't seen the flat earthers, though. Like, were the flat earthers killed off because they didn't vaccinate?
What an interesting concept. Or a cross section: anti-vaxxers and flat earthers.
Where'd all the flat earthers go? Maybe they flew off the planet.
They found the edge, and they're just laughing at us.
Fell off the edge.
They went over the edge.
Flat earthing was hot for a minute, though. That's where I'm like, it's you know, between the doomsday prepping, there's like these weird periods of right-wing movements. Like, I guess they stockpiled all the ammo, they stockpiled all the canned beans, we got all their freeze-dried meat and jerkies, so that, you know, there's nothing else for them to do except wait for Nazi.
Minus the stockpiling of ammo, I'm actually curious about a lot of that stuff because I'm into camping and I want to be able to preserve foods that I take out with me because I want to go camping, but not because I want a giant storeroom of preserved beans. I think that's a different level, though. I think I'm not even at the entry level of prepper survivalism. I'm at I still just want to go camping phase.
Well, but I think there's a
spectrum of reasonable, and then there's
a spectrum.
Yeah.
And this is where it's like, if you're talking about, are you trying to go camping minimalist style? Are you trying to go glamping or something in between? Because there's I want to see if I can survive in the woods with like just a tent and
those are the bushcraft
fucking
guys.
Wits.
Yeah, those are the bushcraft
and it's like
guys.
That's like one extreme, but then there's like, okay, I'm gonna take my flat iron pan and a gas grill, and like I have this, you know, cooler, and the cooler has like a pack in it that's gonna stay cold for 48 hours. So all the stuff in the cooler will stay cool, and it's like that's a huge gap.
Yeah, no, that's like, where I'm at. I'm at that point. I'm not digging a fucking
right. Yeah,
I'm not digging a fucking like a shelter in my backyard and storing, you know, what is it, 90 days worth of food for 4 people. I'm not.
But
at that
nobody.
level.
There's like no need for a TV show for a reasonable person. It's either one or the other. Like the reasonable person who's like, I just want to go out for like a couple days and like I got the, like, you know, the little shit. Like that's not a TV show worthy. And this is the problem where the reasonable moderate shit just is not quite interesting enough to hold people's attention for 21 minutes and some ads. So you don't get that popularized, and it's like only extremes, which is unfortunate because that's where I do think that there is like obviously some benefit in getting people to understand the medium, but it's like if nothing goes wrong and you prepare just enough for everything to go right, and you weren't like over prepared to the point of like looking ridiculous, that's not really like a story.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's nothing inherently noteworthy or a narrative around, oh, well, you didn't pack this, but you were stuck out for 2 days with no toilet paper or what, you know, and it's like for there to actually be a story worthy of someone's attention being held, like something, there needs to be some sort of tension or something has to go wrong to be overcome, or like it has to be extravagant to the point of being like gratuitous and then noteworthy because it's gratuitous, and it's like, otherwise, like, nobody wants to hear about the fucking camping trip where you guys just chilled out and like
never
I think
had a good time.
Your friends obviously, but nobody's like going to tune in about this person that they don't know and watch it. Whereas like if you and your friends were out in the woods for like 5 days and you only had a knife and a fishing pole, like a million people would watch that shit. Like,
yeah, they would want to know
because
how
they do. Right. So it's like, on the one hand, I understand like human interest and attention is inclined to go towards the extremes. But then it's like it's really hard to get people to go towards a moderate practice.
Well, there's part of me that loves watching off-road vehicles climbing up impossible looking trails. And then there's the part of me that's like, yeah, I can build my truck to do that, but the reality is that stuff doesn't exist around here. Like, at all. I'd have to drive my truck to fucking Colorado or Utah to find a lot of the kind of terrain that I see in the videos that I find most interesting. And the kind of terrain we have that's accessible around here is mostly trails and a few steep trails and mostly dirt. There's a few rocks, but none of it's too bad. And the few places where it is a little bit, a little bit rough, none of that stuff requires the kind of insane, like, heavily purpose-built off-road vehicles that are just super popular on YouTube. And it's interesting because what you've alluded to is this measure of practicality that comes with, yeah, sure, I could throw money at things and have this device, but am I ever actually going to use it? I mean, like, for most of those things, the answer is no, because what I really need is just something to transport me and my fishing equipment to the lake, or to get me from point A to point B on a trail so I can, eat lunch and, commune with nature. And then, and the reality is, the few off-road parks that are accessible, it's almost all trails. They're all very technical. There are a few places to stop and eat lunch, and they're fun. But it's not like, it's a whole day thing. It's not like you just can drive there and go for a little jaunt around the park. You got to pay to get in. It's a whole thing. But I'm also not willing to invest in a system, a machine that is built for conditions that don't exist. I think that's what drives a lot, though. Like, people buy cars with race car engines when, the vast majority of time is spent commuting, and in a lot of places, barely the speed limit.
It's almost like abuse to have a fucking hypercar and only like drive it for commutes in town. You know what I mean? Like a Maserati going from fucking an apartment complex to Kroger or some shit. Like, that's sad.
So
I think
when I was a junior or senior in high school, I was working in the library, and after I'd finished, putting books on shelves, I'd have some time to read, and I remember very distinctly clearly reading this article about the Bugatti EB118, and so earlier that year they'd released the EB112, which was a 12-cylinder quad turbo all-wheel drive hypercar, bad mamma jamma, beautiful car. And then later that year they released the 118, which was a 4-door variant. And all of the articles about it, none of them actually talked about the car in any kind of performance context. They only described using it to, like, go to the store to get popcorn and snacks during the commercial break. It's that fast. During the commercial, you can hop in, run down to your grocery store, get some ice cream, some popcorn, and some chips, and be back before the commercial's over. That's the performance metric. It was 4 doors because it's a sedan. That's unnecessarily fast and dangerous. So is a equivalent 500 foot-pound of torque electric motor-driven muscle car, but
Well, and that's where, as you're alluding to, if you have that power, you're going to be tempted to use it for stupid shit like going to the grocery store during commercial breaks and trying to get back. And then you end up taking one curve too fast and flipping the fucking car. And then it's like, RIP me because I wanted to get that fucking ice cream sandwich a little bit faster. And I had the power.
see, this is why we need more ice cream trucks.
You know, at the same time, it is true. Like the number of times people put their lives at risk by taking an individual vehicle when we could have had like a train system in a lot of these cases that would have been on rails and much, much safer by proxy is like, you know, again, the older you get, the more you're aware of how many times a day you could have possibly died.
You know, it's funny. Like the most dangerous part of getting to the train station or the bus station or the airport, or flying. Sorry, the most dangerous part of taking a train or taking a bus or flying on a plane anywhere is actually getting to the terminal, to getting to the bus stop, to getting to the railroad station, to getting to the airport. That's the most dangerous part. It's in the car. That's the most dangerous part. The sad thing is there, like, more people walk away from airplane incidents where they crash than people walk away from car crashes. Like the percentage of people having to be taken to a hospital and ambulance is scarily high.
That makes sense though, because I'm assuming a lot of the plane crashes actually take place on the runway.
Yeah, most plane crashes, the vast majority of them, it's like a landing gear failure, and they do a belly landing. Very rarely do they just like dive into the ground, because most of the time they can pull up and then they can scrape the ground with their belly, and you know, they find a cornfield or something. And a lot of time they walk away from those.
Having flown a lot, I finally like did the research on like what would happen if a plane just like lost its power and like, you know, the engines failed. And there's this element of, as long as the plane wasn't pitched down and the hydraulics to the wings are working, it should be able to like glide. Yeah,
as long as they can open up those control surfaces and adjust trim properly, they should be able to glide down, assuming that there isn't complete and total failure of like all
right systems. And that's where movies, obviously for the sake of drama, make it seem like, oh, as soon as a plane's engine fails, it starts fucking going in this super dive, and that's just completely
most airplanes can stay in the air with one engine.
Yeah.
Like, let alone, like, some of them have, you know, 2, 3, 4 engines.
Well, and the way things are distributed, there is enough highway within, like, I think it's like 50 miles of every airport so that an emergency landing could be made on a public highway. Yeah. That, like, the way that the interstates are.
Yeah. That's a big component in air traffic, I believe. Is they all pretty much are modeling our interstate traffic.
Which is, there's been, you know, a couple times it's made it on the news where somebody's had to make an emergency landing on the interstate somewhere in like California, I think.
Yeah.
But
well, it's crazy. It's like it's actually better that they land on an interstate than they try to land in a field, because then the plane might not require any additional maintenance or servicing. They just need to get it back in the air and into an airport. But getting a plane off of its belly, we're talking cranes.
And that's another thing with like off-roading. So under prime conditions, if you had like an off-road vehicle that you use to go off-roading, well, hopefully nothing goes wrong and you just go off-roading and then you go back home. Yeah. But if the one gets stuck on a rock, or like the winch fucking
failed.
isn't strong enough or whatever. Like it's like the 1 minute, the 1 second your shit isn't working the way it's meant to, then somebody else has to come pull your ass out of that shit. So then it becomes just like some hobbies and some pursuits are so dependent upon having a safety net that like you really can't go off-roading unless you can call somebody to come fucking haul your ass out if you get stuck.
Yeah, that's actually like one of the big reasons that I don't just go on trails and try to go to places like an off-road park is because at an off-road park your chances of another person coming around and being able to give you a hand is very high. Whereas if I just go drive off-road someplace, chances are I'm going to end up in an amalgam of public and private land, and if I get into that situation, I'm fucked. And so one of the things that has been a big motivator is sorting out the issue of a second vehicle in my little off-road group, and at this point it means that we have one vehicle to lead, and one is the potential recovery vehicle if something gets a little too muddy. Because I'm not trying to I'm not trying to drive through a sinkhole or dig up the earth. I'm not trying to make things worse. I just want to go see places that I will have difficulty walking to otherwise. I want to find a cool place where I can't see signs of humanity other than my truck and myself and the group of people that I'm with, and not hear, turn everything off and not hear the interstate or not hear signs of civilization. No more big bumping bass car driving by when I'm trying to eat a sandwich.
Luckily, that's fairly easy here.
That is.
I mean, obviously, I'm sure that's why you stayed, but I think it's funny.
That's why I never was interested in relocating to Indianapolis. Because it's just too much city noise for me.
Yeah. And I think people who live in big cities just don't have any concept of what it's like to be able to think and not have some noise constantly fucking violating your inner dialogue or inner monologue, I guess. I mean, I guess it would probably be a conversation if we're really going to keep it real with the id, ego, and super ego.
Yeah.
It's not just one person. It's like your parents or your moral compass and your desires that you're internally discussing with.
Yeah.
And so that's where having a clear sonic landscape to have those internal conversations is way different than constantly having shit bombarding you. And I think people just get used to the constant bombarding and just really have no concept of what it would be like to operate without that shit, and not knowing that. I mean, some people may prefer it. I'm sure some people are like the extroverts that want it constantly, but
there's something to be said for the things that we're capable of thinking of when we aren't just dealing with background noise. When the only background noise is some crickets or some birds, maybe a squirrel rustling up a nut off in the distance. It's actually quite incredible. Once the mind calms down enough that it's no longer fighting to have priority with ideas. Even where I am, I'm just on the edge of town, and sometimes I feel like I'm too close. I wouldn't want to live any further away because then it's a pain in the ass to get into town for resources. And this comes with the expansion of developed areas. People are going to expand the reaches of the city because they want to have those resources too. Just the nature of things. It's part of homeostasis of our environment. we can count on a certain measure of change and a certain amount of stability and a certain amount of anchor-like behavior to prevent change. I'm still in the camp of environmental management is this strange concept, because I'm pretty sure that the environment can manage itself just fine without humans.
Yeah. It's a very Judeo-Christian concept in its application, but I guess we're coming to grips with the Judeo-Christian hold on our government and its policies. So we gotta call them out before we can break them.
But we're not allowed to understand environmental management until, you've got to have like a master's degree just to be able to read the materials and go to the conferences and to have a voice. I absolutely have sheer disdain for the concept of environmental management, because when I go into the woods and I see a grove of trees that have been there for so long that two people can't wrap their arms around it, I have a hard time believing, especially when there are like zero signs of humans. I have a hard time believing that there has been any active management of that section, that plot of land. There might have been a survey at some point. They said, "Yeah, we can't do anything here," but and usually it's always pertains to like somebody wants to cut down trees in some location, and they say it's because they're thinning the trees down so it becomes less of a fire hazard. When those forests have been standing for decades, if not hundreds of years. I get it. Out west, there are significant fire hazard issues because there's no water, because the people are foolish and allow their water rights to get sold off to corporations that are just going to siphon it all out. And they've got other complications like, giant population pumping shit into the atmosphere all the time, and that's not necessarily returning as water. But here in the eastern half of the country, where everything is still bright green and we have water aplenty, I'm sure that there are a host of other issues that I'm unaware of that are compounding all of these things. But you know what? It's a fireworks weekend, and I think some idiot in Michigan killed himself in a jet truck during a demonstration of a jet engine-powered truck. And
Jesus Christ.
And the night is still young. We're probably going to get some more explosions between now and Monday night. Hopefully nobody else blows themselves up trying to do a demonstration at a car show or an air show. More stupid things.
Rocket-powered cars and trucks are a terrible idea.
I think unless it's going into space, nothing needs to be strapped to a rocket.
Right. Yeah, that's a fairly low. I think that's a pretty low bar. I don't think that's a high bar to be setting, right? Like cars and trucks do not need to have rockets. I don't feel like I'm.
You're not alone, man.
Out of touch.
No, nobody needs fucking rockets. Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Bass Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random.
Exceptional Radio.